This is the part where I get to recommend a book to you, and I'm going to begin with Preventing Violence by psychiatrist James Gilligan, who worked in Massachusetts for 25 years overlooking the psychiatric department of high security prisons, has been on the Harvard Medical Board, and now is teaching at NYU. I could not recommend this book more. I think it's an almost required reading for all of us because of the depth of understanding that it has of violence and what we can do to prevent it. The book begins by kind of presenting an overarching view of our legal and criminal system, expressing that we've basically had the same system that the old Greeks and Romans had, which is a culture of crime and punishment. And what Professor Gilligan does is that he deconstructs the reasons why this culture is only conducive to more violence. So basically for 4 millennia, we've been implementing a system that he calls a total failure. Now, after his work in these prisons, he kept repeating that when he would meet with prisoners and ask them, why did you commit this crime? Why did you murder someone? Why did you do this? The consistent answer that he would receive was, because he disrespected me. And what he was saying was that most of these people thought that there was huge value in having taken the decision that they made because they had in some way restored their respect back or restored their dignity back. He explains that actually in many cases these acts of violence are viewed as the only possible solution that people have to really bring that dignity back. He moves on to speaking about shame and guilt. And he says that shame is the primary trigger for violence. And the way that he explains this very in depth is that whenever we experience relative poverty or socioeconomic disparity, educational disparity, it creates this imbalance in the fabric of society where the person views themselves as someone that hasn't been able to maybe get a degree, maybe have that job, maybe provide for their family. And this leads a sense of shame. And this is oversimplifying because he does break into many, many different examples. And he does speak about relative poverty, where this structure escalates to other parts of society that might be quite affluent, but there's still that relative poverty to feeling, I'm not good enough, I haven't attained enough, and it causes this shame. Now, most of us will have a tool set to be able to handle that shame in a healthy way. But what he argues is that due to what we've been exposed to, there will be lots of people that don't have access to that toolbox, and they will not know that there's a way to process that shame in a way that's not hurtful to other people. So it might be that they've been exposed to extreme cases of violence themselves, to hurt, to pain, to various things, but the point is that it hasn't been processed, the trauma hasn't healed, the pain hasn't healed, and people don't actually know that they have the capacity to deal with these things in a healthy way, leading therefore to shame, leading therefore to anger, leading therefore to violence towards others. He then speaks of cultures of shame, in which he speaks of a level of violence that can turn inwards, towards the self. So perhaps in a culture of guilt where you have inflicted pain on others, or you have, even if it's accidentally done something, you will feel a guilt of having done something wrong, of something that's weighing on you. And then the violence, which is still a violence, turns inwards and can become very destructive, leading in worst case scenarios, obviously, to somebody who might take their life. So he also talks about violence in a way that it can be prevented in different stages. So at the moment, if we take a look at the world, most services available that I have been able to find are for survivors of violence or victims. And it's basically, at this point, almost like putting a Band-Aid on what's actually causing the violence to begin with. What leads someone to abuse? What leads someone to make that choice? And that's the question that he asks most prevalently. He calls this primary care, where we actually go to analyze how these socioeconomic, educational, political, gender factors influence someone to taking these steps. If we could tackle the problem at the source before one single perpetrator has abused 6 victims, right? If we can tackle it then imagine what we could prevent in tertiary care, which is what he calls basically helping survivors once they've already been through the problem. He wraps up his book by talking about a very interesting chapter, which is who benefits from violence. So this book was actually published in 2001, and even then he said that none of these ideas were revolutionary. You know, we've all known about the causes of violence, what it is that actually triggers these actions, but he claims that actually there are people in certain socioeconomic brackets and political brackets that actually benefit from the divide and conquer strategy, right? Which I think is a very valuable angle, because if we know what causes violence, and why aren't we solving it? Why aren't we going, oh my God, we need to stop this at all costs? So all in all, I think an excellent read. It's very brief, it's quite short, not the easiest thing to find. I got mine used on Amazon. It's from a public library, and I think at the moment my colleague Emma has also only been able to find a used book, but I would recommend definitely that you get a hold of it, and hopefully we can continue talking about all of this. So I hope you have an excellent day. We look forward to your comments and look forward to the next book review.